Okay, welcome to the Family Resource Center presentation tonight. We're excited to bring this topic that will allow all of us to understand more about the transition planning with the school district, the regional center, and the Department of Rehabilitation to Adult Services. It's a very long topic, and it's actually a very packed content that we have for you guys tonight. First, I actually want to just briefly, very quickly share with you who we are, who is the Family Resource Center for the people who don't know right now. And I'm gonna share my screen very quickly so that I can show you who we are. And it's just one slide. I don't know if you guys can see it. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see my presentation? Great, thank you. So we are we're serving families who have children with disabilities and special needs in San Mateo County. If you're out of county, we will refer you to another county. So, but we do the best we can to serve all families. We provide help with transition to preschool, sometimes early intervention, maybe application to Social Security, IHSS, navigating IEPs and questions related to special education laws. So we are here to serve you, and we are open Monday to Friday from 9 to 5. And in the slide, you can see our information, how to contact by email at info@sncfrc.org, or we also have one in Spanish. If anyone can paste that in the chat, it would be great. We also have our website that is available in English and Spanish. We have an office located in Burlingame, but most of us are working remotely or in a hybrid model. So we mostly work from home, and then sometimes we go to the office. So we're not fully back in person yet. But you're more than welcome to connect with us with any questions that you might have. So I'm going to stop this right now. Let me go back just a second. My team is here with me tonight. I just want to ask you guys to maybe raise your hand so they know. Denise Espino Tinoco is here tonight. She's our new administrative assistant. We have Gabriela Diaz Santos. She's a Family Resource Center coordinator. Iris Wen is our training coordinator. She's just joined us just about a month ago, almost a month ago. So I am pretty much done with the introduction, but I just want to give some very basic guidelines about our training. Please remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking. We encourage you to use names to protect your confidentiality and your personal information. We ask you that you have your video on or off based on your preference or comfort level. And we also invite grace and generosity and respectfulness during our training. During QA, which we have questions and answers, please remember to raise your hand when you want to ask a question instead of using the chat to put the question. And this is because we also want to be mindful and protect your information and your confidentiality. Just also a reminder that this is interpretation. This training it's being translated from English to Spanish. So bear with us. If this is too fast, you can let us know maybe, or raise your hand so we can slow down, because we might forget. We get so excited. So yeah, please let's pause a little bit during the questions and the answers, so that we're sure that you get all the information that you need. And at the end of this presentation, we're gonna share our survey so that you guys can give us some feedback about the training and how it went for you all. So now I am done with my part, and I'm gonna hand you over to Leilani. She's from Disability Rights California, and she's coordinating and supporting us with this training. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you to the team. My name is Leilani Pfeiffer. I'm with Disability Rights California. On behalf of our team, I'd like to introduce Marie Ararti, our senior attorney, Emily Ikuta, our staff attorney, and Mary Rios, our senior advocate. These are your presenter for this evening. Before we get started, let me share a little bit about our agency, and then we will have Raymond Kwong do the formal introduction of our team. We were formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We're a nonprofit organization that's federally mandated to provide legal services for people with disabilities. We work on issues such as special education, regional center services, public benefits, housing, employment, ADA, mental health services, and so forth. Our offices are in Sacramento, Los Angeles, Bay Area, and San Diego. Our smaller office is Fresno, Ontario, and Modesto. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Raymond Kwong. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I totally forgot. My bad. I forgot to mention that please select the English channel if you want to listen to this presentation in English for the English speakers. And if you want to listen to this presentation in Spanish, please select the interpretation channel at the bottom. There's a menu where it says interpretations and select the Spanish channel if that's where you want to listen to this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As Lonnie said, we have 3 presenters today. I'm going to briefly introduce our presenters. So we have Maria Fernanda Iriarte. She is one of our senior attorneys here at Disability Rights California. She's also a member of the Legal Clinics Project. Her expertise is in the area of public benefits. Ms. Iriarte has a Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration from California State University, Long Beach, and a Juris Doctor degree from Loyola Law School. And we have our staff attorney, Emily Ikuta. She works with the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Practice Group. They strive to help individuals with developmental disabilities access regional center services and avoid institutionalization. Before DRC, she worked as an associate attorney at Adam & Associates, a special education law firm, and interned at the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office. She received her Juris Doctor from USC Gould School of Law. And last but not least, Mary Rios, who is one of our senior advocates at Disability Rights California. She has been an advocate for over 25 years. Mary is an individual with a disability. Her passion is informing and educating people with disabilities about their rights and empowering individuals with disabilities to become self-advocates. Thank you to our presenter again. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Maria to begin the presentation.
Good evening, everyone, and we're going to go ahead and put the PowerPoints up. We're going to have a PowerPoint in English and another in Spanish. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So when we're talking about transition planning, what do we mean? So the law says in California that at age 16, you as parents and the student has the right to ask for a transition planning meeting so that you can, and what is it for? It's to figure out what the student is going to want to do with his or her life after they leave high school. What are those plans? Do those plans involve some kind of work goal? Because if the plan involves a work goal, then you might want to invite the Department of Rehabilitation to that transition planning meeting that you're going to have with the school district. Also, if the person is a regional center client, you're going to want to invite the regional center to also be present. So it's possible during the transition planning meetings that 3 agencies may be involved. So just briefly, special education is for students age 3 to 22. With the Department of Rehab, there's for people with disabilities who are 16 or over, who are not yet Department of Rehabilitation clients, there are transition services that are available through the Department of Rehabilitation, and we'll talk about that. And then if you're a regional center client, there's no age limit to be a regional center client. You just need to meet the definitions to become the criteria to become a regional center client. Next slide. So today we're going to talk about tips for transition plans, we're going to talk about the school district's role in transition plan, the regional center's role, Department of Rehab's role, and how to deal with disagreements or hurdles that you may come across. Because remember, when you're dealing with more than one agency, it's possible that one agency will say to you, no, it's not our responsibility, it's that other agency. And then you're like a ping pong going back. So we'll hopefully address those later on in the presentation. Next slide. So planning for the future. Next slide. Okay, we're going to talk about competitive integrated employment later, but what does it mean? It means real jobs with real wages. It means that a person with a disability should be able to earn the same amount of money that a person without a disability is earning, right? Have equal opportunities to get promotions, just like anyone else. Next slide. You know, something that we should always keep in mind is have high expectations. You could do it with the right supports. People with disabilities work. They earn a living. They have really good jobs. So just because you're a person with a disability doesn't mean that you can't work. You just need the right services and supports in place. Set goals so that you can achieve those goals, right? Have options, and really believe in you. Next slide. So what does a good plan include? It's individualized. It's your plan. It has concrete goals, achievable goals, real timelines. It has to have timelines and realistic timelines. It reflects your choices. It reflects high expectations. It includes the supports that you're going to need and the dates that the plan will be reviewed. Next slide. So when you're drafting a transition plan with the district and other agencies, include specific language. So if it's competitive employment, include that. Are you going to college? Are you going to live in the community? That's all part of transition planning. You're going to want to identify the people and agencies who can help you achieve your goals, write them down in the plan, request that they attend the meeting. Like I said, Department of Rehabilitation and the Regional Center could be invited. What are the roles of these agencies? What are they going to do? And that goes into the transition plan and the timelines, programs that would be good for you. And always, if your request is denied, you can always request a notice of action that includes your rights to appeal. So next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Mary Reels, who's going to talk about the school's role in, or the district's role in the transition planning.
Thank you, Maria. Good evening, everyone. So we're going to cover the school district's portion in developing the individual transition plan. So we go to the next slide. Thank you, Raymond. So ITP, again, as Maria indicated, it's an individualized transition plan. And it's part of the IEP when the individual student turns 16, I'm sorry. Sometimes they start at a sooner age, but no later than the age of 16. The individual transition plan, remember, it's part of the IEP, so therefore it's a legal contract. Everything should be included in the IEP. It describes and focuses on the strengths and the interest of the individual student. You know, the student should be involved in identifying the measurable goals that the student wants included in the IEP. Services should be identified to support those goals, and there should also be assessments completed. The school district does have an obligation to assess for transition planning, and if once the assessment is completed, you should request a copy of that report at least 5 days before the IEP and transition meeting. That way you have an opportunity to review it in its entirety. If you disagree with that, you can then request an independent evaluation. Next slide. So what should be included in the transition plan? As I indicated before, any goals, objectives that the student may have. If they identify the type of employment, if they have a vocational goal, include that in the IEP transition plan. The education that is needed, if they need to pursue higher education to meet that goal, that should be included. Independent living services, there are different agencies available, and this is why it's important to involve not only the Department of Rehabilitation, but if you're a client of the regional center, they have an obligation also to make sure that these services are provided to the individual student. There are also agencies that provide independent living skills to show the individual consumer money management, how to use a bus, transportation. So there are different services available out in the community. Activities should be included as well. Any instructional services that are needed, community experiences that the individual student identifies, any employment related objectives. And that could be, I've heard of a student who wanted to start his own business. So the Department of Rehabilitation assisted him with developing his business plan. Students have the right to also pursue their vocational goals and include this in the transition plan with the Department of Rehabilitation. Any related services should be included, such as speech, occupational therapy, any career guidance, transportation, any counseling that's needed, and any other services that are needed. So it's really important that these services and supports be included in the transition plan. Next slide. So this is an example of the individual transition plan, and it has all the information. Many districts have different transition plan documents. So this is something, this is from a school district, and again, they're all different, but they basically identify the same information. The students' post-secondary goal, training, or education, they identify that they included in the transition plan. Next slide. Next part, yes. So here is the student's post-secondary goal employment. If they have a vocational goal, what is it that the student needs to meet that goal? They should identify timelines as well. These timelines should be included with all the supports and services that the student needs. And again, remember that verbalizing everything. I mean, when you have that conversation in the IEP team in the IEP meeting, make sure that it's documented in the IEP, in the transition plan. And you also, just so you know, you also have a right to record the IEP meeting as long as you give the school district 24-hour written notice that you intend on recording the IEP meeting. Basically, you can record audio. So that's really important to identify as well. Next slide. So I will turn it over to Emily.
Do we want to stop right now before we go on to the regional center to see if there are any questions about the district's role?
For sure, I'll stop.
I hear from on regional center's role in transition planning.
Good evening, guys. This is Emily Ikuta. I'm going to be covering the regional center portion of this presentation. Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Mary, for going over the services and those for the special education and as well as DUR. And I just wanted to touch on the fact that regional center services, a very big portion, especially for adult individuals or young adult individuals, it is important to consider the overlap of these different agencies. So I'm going to go over more into this portion on regional center. So I just, before I get into the more specifics of services that can benefit benefit you in terms of transition, it's important to touch on the basics. And a big basic component in terms of approaching what kind of services you as a client of the regional center should need is the IPP. The individual program plan. So you've heard these acronyms, IEPs and other such. That's the school version of the school district version. This is the regional center version, IPP. And you can't even get started on getting those services that you feel you need to transition unless you go through the IPP process. And this is just a overview of how that works. So your IPP, it lists your goals and the services and supports you need to meet those goals. And you can ask for an IPP meeting to discuss adding a transition service related goal. An example would be, I want a goal on working in competitive integrated employment. I want a goal to work in the community. I want a goal that recognizes that I want to go to college. Now, that being said, there are some restrictions on services for transition aged youths, specifically for those who are also eligible for special education, and between the ages of 18 and 22. I'm going to go more into that in a later slide. Your service coordinator, that's basically the point person that is your main point of contact through the regional center. The service coordinator can help you advocate for services that you also need from the school and or the Department of Rehabilitation. And the regional center is required to help families secure transition services from the school district. And just for convenience, I added some of the relevant welfare and institution codes that that apply to these specific points in the slide. And similar to the IEP with the school district, these are just some additional points not listed, not specifically stated in this slide. You also should treat the IPP as like a legal contract. You can't, it's something where you have that discussion, that agreement between you and your regional center team about what services and supports you need to meet your goals and objectives. And when I say goals and objectives, that's usually the term used by regional centers, but I've seen different phrases for it. I've seen outcomes, I've seen dreams, but nonetheless, they describe the sort of long-term type objectives and the services you need to meet those objectives. And all right, that was the main point. Everything else I'm going to clarify in later slides. So I wanted to bring up just the focus of the regional center as it relates to employment. So the Lanterman Act, and by Lanterman Act, I'm talking about the specific state set of laws that created the whole regional center system, as well as the entitlement of people who have developmental disabilities to these kinds of services. So the Lanterman Act was amended. Basically, those laws were changed to reflect the recognition for opportunities for more integrated competitive employment, and that be the highest priority. And by integrated competitive, that's minimum wage, the kind of a pay that any other person without a disability would be getting. And that should apply, and the focus should be to ensure that kind of employment opportunity, regardless of the severity of your disability. The law stresses that integrated competitive employment is intended to be the first option considered by the planning team for those working age individuals like yourself or family members that are caring for. And that those individuals can choose goals, but they can also choose goals other than integrated competitive employment. So I just want to emphasize that as well. It's up to the individual preferences, the needs of you or the person, the family member who is a client of the regional center, of what they feel is the best way to meet their needs in terms of accessing vocational skills, employment skills, that kind of employment. And if that means other options other than competitive integrated employment, then that is your right. The law also states that post-secondary education, that being college, technical or vocational training, and internship programs can be considered as a means to achieve these integrated competitive employment or career advancement. So those, and I'm going to go on just kind of like what those paid internship options are through the regional center, as well as other relevant factors to consider if you are a transition age individual who is seriously considering this and want to see what your options are from the regional center. So just this is more identifying those helpful and specific transition services that you can look into from the regional center. I just want to point out, though, that the type of services that you can request is non-exhaustive. If there's a service in there that's not explicitly listed in the law, and I actually included the code, it's on the bottom, 4512, where you're like, you know what, given my specific needs and what I want, I'm thinking about a service to help me achieve employment, but is more specific to me and not actually laid out in the law. You can do that. It's an individual based type of analysis, the whole type, in terms of what services are most appropriate for you from the regional center. So this is just going to touch on the type of, but these are the common services where there actually is a policy amongst regional centers that they make accessible or should make accessible to individuals who are transition age. So that includes options for living arrangements for after you turn 18 years old, supports and services for maintaining that independence, whether that be like, you know, learning some kind of skill or even keep maintaining your own living space. Recreation, this is a new one actually, because this service was actually very much restricted, and there was a change in the law so that it's been restored. So just want to give you a heads up about that. Financial assistance, if it applies and if necessary, trainings, advocacy and information, and more. Like I said, there's a pretty extensive list laid out in that code, but it is a non-exhaustive list. You can always consider additional options, whatever is most appropriate according to your needs. So one service where you're going to find it in these, and I backtrack a bit. When I said that these are services in their policies, I'm talking about each of the regional centers having written policies about certain services. There's actually a name for that: Purchase of Service Policies, or POS. And these policies will lay out what these services are. It's really more for the regional center service coordinators, but also available to any client of the regional center about what the process is for requesting a certain service, how many they're going hours or the frequency they're going to provide, what the criteria is. I just want to give you a heads up, though, that policies have to be in line with the law. A policy should not be more restrictive than what the law, the Lanterman Act allows. But giving you that heads up that these are services, like, for example, supported living services that are regional, that as far as I know, every regional center has a specific stated policy about, including yours. So if you're curious about SLS, for example, ask your service coordinator. I want to know about living options, SLS, the other services I'm going to be describing in this presentation. So sorry for that little tangent. Going back to SLS, supported living services. SLS are services that are provided for people, clients of the regional center, so that they can live in their own home or apartment. SLS cannot be denied based solely on the nature or severity of your disability. And like I mentioned before, SLS, like other regional center services, must be tailored to your needs and preferences. Now that being said, there are requirements for getting SLS. You are eligible for SLS if you are at least 18 years old. You have expressed directly or through an advocate a preference for SLS, and that's pretty much where the whole IPP process comes in, where you bring that up, that you want, that you're interested in this option, and you are living in a home that you own or rent. I just want to stress that last point. When they say it's your own home, they really do mean it's yours. Unfortunately, there have been circumstances where individuals living in the family home, like with their parents, for example, where they do make, where they are making active efforts to be independent and contributing to the household. Nonetheless, technically, that's not they don't meet the criteria because it's not their own home or apartment, since their parents cover it, or like, cover the rent and other expenses. So I just want to bring up that there is that restriction. This is actually a point that me and our practice group at DRC have been really trying to focus and trying to push for reform if possible, to be more expansive about eligibility for SLS. But as it is now, I just want to point out that this is the criteria.
Emily, I have a question.
Yeah.
So if I'm a regional center client and I'm asking for supported living services, but I pay my fair share of rent, let's say I live with my parents, but I'm paying my fair share of rent and I contribute to food because I share in the food, that's not enough for supported living services?
Unfortunately, that is likely not enough. But if not SLS, there is another service that you can utilize that can also more or less cover that the function of SLS in terms of increasing independence. And that's called Independent Living Skills Services, or ILS. And in fact, a lot of agencies that provide SLS also provide ILS, and sometimes they go back and forth. Like I've actually seen, I'm going to go over into ILS if you guys are wondering, like, what's this other service you're talking about? I've actually had clients where they were living in their parents' house, and had ILS, because ILS is not restricted by whether you live in your own home or not. And then the ILS staff actually helped them to look into options for independent living, like affordable apartments or other rooms, and how to utilize the whatever resources, public resources, to pay for that. I've even seen some that actually covered the rent, at least temporarily, with reimbursement from the regional center until the person was able to establish their own space. And then once they had their own space, that ILS transitioned into SLS. And sometimes it was just a matter of changing the name. It was like the same staff working for them. So just giving you a heads up that there is another service that can help, that does not have to abide by that, having your own home or apartment type restriction. But thank you for Maria for bringing that up, so that could be clarified. So I just want to going over the rest of the slide, this just goes over the specific types of SLS supports and services that are identified in the law. And again, it's a fairly long list, but these are the main ones I wanted to include. One of them is assessment of your needs. Straight up, they're called, when you want to, if you're seriously considering SLS, then, the first step usually is get an SLS assessment. Literally having someone go out, look at your, your functionality in terms of skills, your interest, what you want, what you need in order to maintain your own space. And as well, and other, so that's just kind of one main one. And if you just to get started on where you need help in terms of SLS. SLS includes supports that help in finding and maintaining a home, development of employment goals, because a big part of owning your own home is, for some individuals, it's being able to maintain a job where they can afford the living expenses. Social, behavioral, and daily living skills type training. SLS can also include training, hiring, and even firing, if necessary, individuals to provide personal care and other assistance. And also, another big one, facilitate participation in the community. There's more to living independently than just making sure that you are on top of keeping your, on top of your apartment or your own space. There's also going out in the community, integrating and engaging in other social activities. So I just wanted, this is just like an important list of the kinds of services one can get if you are eligible for SLS. Another thing, just kind of continuing on SLS and clarifying what I think is important in terms of SLS and owning your own home. The individual program plan, IPP, that determines SLS eligibility. So if anytime you're interested in this kind of service, you got to go through the IPP process. Just a heads up, you don't have, while IPP meetings are usually held annually for a client of the regional center, you can ask for an IPP at any time. You don't have to sit and wait for the annual one to roll around. You can be like, I want an IPP meeting, and per the law, you got to hold one within 30 days. And that's what they have to do. So that's what I just want to give you a heads up, that if you need an IPP meeting to discuss a service that you feel you need, including a transition type service, you can just straight up ask for it. Always best to do it in writing though. That way you have that 30, you can specifically cite back so you can take advantage of that 30-day timeline. So sorry, going back to the slide. Regional centers contract with a vendor to coordinate the services and supports needed for you to live in your own home. And the vendor is basically the service provider, the agency being paid through the regional center to provide services, including SLS. But that being said, that's typically an agency, but the vendor can also be actually someone you know, a family member or a friend. Given once there's IPP team, once there's like approval and acknowledgement by the IPP team. So, if, for example, if you feel like someone you know that you trust would be in a better position to help provide that kind of service of SLS, how to maintain your own home, how to, all the list of things I mentioned in the previous slide, you can do that. You just have to make sure to bring it up at the IPP meeting and go through that process of making sure the team knows this and confirm that they agree to that. And then it's written into your IPP. You can even coordinate the services yourselves. Obviously, you as the client of the regional center, you can't be your own SLS provider, but you can take a big role on figuring out who you want to be your SLS provider, including their skills, their background, hiring and firing, that kind of those important stuff. Now, I just want to point out at the bottom, regional centers, and I say generally, but this is the expectation that you should have. They cannot pay for the rent, mortgage, lease, or household expenses. There are exceptions though, under specific circumstances. So these exceptions are if payment of rent and these other expenses are required to meet your unique and specific care needs as described in your IPP, and your condition presents a risk to the health and safety of yourself or another person. And I actually want to give an example of just the kind of client that I've had where the regional center did pay for their rent. It was an individual who, this was during the pandemic, because of the whole the chaos of that period, the person was let go from their job. And it was difficult for him to, make enough money to continue living in his own place. He ended up in a group home. It was not an ideal situation for someone like this. And so he really wanted to have his own space and also to get right back to working. But he needed the right kind of paperwork from DOR. I think some of the paper that some of the information and document he needed had expired. And so that took some time to get the information, the resources he needed to get right back to working and saving up resources so that he could maintain his own space. So what that regional center did was okay, we'll pay for rent we'll pay for your apartment and we'll pay for the rent until you get all the materials, the resources, the help from, like, instance, the Department of Rehab you need to look into and apply to these different jobs. And, as long as you're making an active effort to get on top of this and communicating and working with these other agencies, then we'll continue paying for the rent. But, with a condition of, we're going to keep reviewing this. If it turns out that we can end it if you're not meeting the conditions. But that's just an example where the circumstances were such that the regional center paid for this individual's rent. And this is becoming more and more of a factor, especially with just how challenging, because changes in your life can make it so that it can make it hard to cover your living expenses. And that can, and if you can't have your own space, that pretty much impacts everything else. So I just want to let you know that there are circumstances where you can reach out to the regional center for help to cover those expenses, but generally don't expect it. Just be prepared to make the argument for why if you are in a situation where your living space is being compromised. All right, so I mentioned in the previous slide, independent living skills, ILS. So ILS is, that's a service where fortunately there is no such condition of having to live in your own space. You can access ILS services wherever you are, even if you're living in a group home type setting. So what is ILS? ILS are the independent living skills themselves are those skills that a person needs to learn to live independently in the community. And so ILS, so how you can improve on these skills is getting ILS training. ILS, you can receive ILS training in any setting, including your own home, in your parents' home, the home of a friend or a relative, or even in a licensed facility. These types of services are provided through independent living programs. They coordinate these ILS services, and they can teach a wide variety of skills, depending on what kind of skills you want to improve on or what you need to improve on. And there's a list for this too: cooking, cleaning, shopping, money management, how to use public transportation, community resource awareness, home and community safety, and more. And as with SLS, there are requirements, even if that whole having your own home thing doesn't apply. You are an adult over 18 years old, and if that ILS will enable you to live independently in your own home, or achieve greater independence while living in someone else's home. So just want you to be aware of that criteria. Oh, by the way, although you have to be 18, that doesn't mean that you have to wait until you turn 18 to inquire about these services. You can, and I would say should, bring it up with your service coordinator. And you can even get on top of the assessment process of like, okay, well, I'm about to turn 18 or within a year. Can I get can we get a plan going for getting an assessment? So someone can go and analyze what skills, what types of services, what kind of supports I need in order to live more independently. And that way that can help set things up as you become a legal adult. So a very important thing I wanted to touch on as part of this, and this applies to all regional center services, not just the ones the transition ones I just talked about, is this topic of generic resources. And I want to touch on it because this topic is going to be a factor and may impact whether or not you can actually access those services I just talked about from the regional center. So I'm just going to go over what these are. You may have heard the word before, but this is just to really break down what it is and how you can factor into that and even prepare to respond when you are pushing for specific services from the regional center. So a generic resource is basically if there's a service or support that the regional center provides, but that you can also get from another public agency, the same or similar service, you have to exhaust that service from that agency. And those other public agencies, those are called generic resources or generic agencies. So if you've ever heard the phrase payer of last resort from the regional center, that's what they're talking about. The regional centers are prohibited from purchasing any service that would otherwise be available from generic agencies. And I actually put a list of generic agencies. It's a non-exhaustive list. There's more if it applies, but these are the big ones. That being Medi-Cal and Medicare. If you can get, I'll use an example, ABA services. If you can get it, or if you're like eligible or a recipient of Medi-Cal, and that's a service you could get from Medi-Cal, You got to go through Medi-Cal before, and if they say, only when they say no or deny it or make you wait for a long time when you need it, can you go back to the regional center to make that same request. Another one, in-home supportive services from the county, IHSS. Another one, Department of Rehabilitation, DOR. And another big one, the school district. So this is where the whole importance of coordination of agencies comes in, where it's like, okay, well, I have to exhaust generic resources, but how do I even know what those resources are? And how do I know if I've actually exhausted them? This is why this coordination is so important, so that you don't end up being, ping-ponged around and not knowing and not actually getting what you need. But I just want to point out that if, let's say, you're in a situation where you do really need a service, and it's going to take some time for you to know if you're actually going to get that service from a generic agency. For example, let's say you're applying to get IHSS services from the county, but that takes time. They're not going to make a decision right then and there. And it's like, look, I or my family member who is a client of the regional center, we need this service right now. It's urgent. And so you actually have the option of requesting the regional center to pay for that service pending a final decision on whether that generic resource or agency will cover that service. So I just want you to know that's a tool, an option that you can use if it's a matter of a service where you have an urgent need, a real urgent need for it. Also want to give you a heads up. If, let's say, the regional center gives you, let's say you're requesting a service and the regional center is like, you got to go through generic resources first. You got to show us that you've done that. That doesn't mean the regional center is off the hook. In fact, the regional center has an obligation to help in identifying and even helping you apply for generic resources. And I'll put down, I'm trying to see, I actually mentioned the welfare and the eligible code because I don't think it's on this slide. It's California Code of Regulations, section 54302. Sorry, wrong one. Welfare and Institutions Code 4659. Regional centers must identify and pursue all possible sources of funding. So again, Welfare and Institutions Code section 4659. Just want to lay that out so you can get there. You can make that point to your service coordinator of, I need help for you getting access to generic resources. And then if those sources are not going to help, then I'm going to make that request to you, the regional center.
Emily, can I bring something up? Exhaustion of generic resources. I've heard of regional centers requiring consumers to, not only do they get denied by Medi-Cal, but they have to appeal before the regional center will even consider. And I've heard of other regional centers being okay with a denial from Medi-Cal, not requiring people to go to hearing. I mean, either way, you can ask for those gap services, right? But why is there a difference between regional centers as to what they require consumers to do? The exhaustion of generic resources, do you know? I've never really gotten a clear answer, so I'm asking because I really don't know why there's a difference.
Honestly, this is a problem that's not amongst regional centers having like different approaches, different policies. It's not unique to just a generic resource. I've seen it where it's like they have wildly different approaches on other services as well. And I think the problem is that despite them having to comply with, the law, the Lanterman Act, in terms of how they specifically write their policies, it varies by regional center. They're given they end up with a lot of leeway. As long as they're not actively violating the law, they end up with policies that are going to approaches that are going to be that ends up with one regional center being quite different from another regional center. And sometimes I've even seen the same regional center having different approaches when it was a different service coordinator or a different manager of a set of service coordinators. I think I even remember a service provider actually was like, because I was coordinating with him to try to figure out how to help this client, where he was just like, I literally just worked with another service, had a meeting with another service coordinator for a different client, but it was the same regional center and they didn't have to make me go through all this. And I was just like, yeah, it really sucks. But that being said, that doesn't mean you have to take it sitting down. And so if it's like, if, for example, you have a regional center where they're like, oh, you got to appeal, etc., push back on it. Be like, well, that's going to take time. And and also the fact that I have to appeal already means I'm in a position where I have to fight for a service where there's no guarantee, where I've already been denied, whereas no guarantee I'll even win. And it's going to be a huge burden and a time consuming effort. And so, effectively, that basically means I'm not going to get this service. And so I want you, the regional center, to cover that. Use the gap funding. Actually, thank you, Maria, for actually putting a name to it. The whole getting, requesting regional center to cover a service pending a decision, and that includes appeals. That's called gap funding. Like when there's a gap, you, the regional center, should be responsible for that. And so I would say push back really, and actually ask them for their policy in writing. Is this your actual policy? Give it to me in writing. And even if they have it in writing, I would still push back, being like, well, it's not, like I said, policies they're not binding if the law allows it to be more expansive. And as far as I know, the Lanterman Act doesn't say anything about you got to go through each and every appeals process to get access to, before you can finally get back to the regional center and ask for it. As far as I know, the law doesn't say that. So if they have a policy like that, be like, that's not binding. And I'm still going to push back on that. And I'm going to rely on my gap funding argument. So I just want to let you know that you don't have to take that lying down, that argument. Also, you can even put it on the regional center. Fine. You want me to appeal? I want you to help me appeal. Go there and make the case for me for why I should get more IHSS hours, since you're telling me I should do this before I ask for respite. But in the meantime, gap funding, give me respite. So just letting you know, those are the tools that you should take, should take advantage of. But yeah, the issue of not being, like, regional centers not being uniform, it's a common problem. We've actually filed a federal lawsuit because there was a very real issue of different regional centers having wildly different approaches to services for clients who were deaf and hard of hearing. So some of them were actually pretty good, like actually did provide accommodations and services for those who are also deaf and hard of hearing, like interpreters. And other ones were terrible. Like no interpreters, even people who are straight up deaf who could sign, no actual interpreters at IPP meetings, no services where they could even communicate with anyone. It was so just like, look, just because there's some regional centers that did it right, doesn't mean that lets those others off the hook. This is why we're filing this lawsuit. So if you're interested in that, I can give you the name and all, but I don't want to distract from the main point of this PowerPoint. But I just want to point out that really important issue that Maria brought attention to.
Thank you, Emily.
Okay, yeah, but moving on. So so I wanted to focus on this just because this is a potentially really helpful resource for individuals like yourself who are considering paid employment and want regional center to help. So there's actually this acknowledgement and reform to the law that includes paid internship programs. And as with everything, there's always an acronym. They usually refer to this as PIP. So if you see PIP in any hubs from the regional center, that's what they're talking about, paid internship program. Under Welfare and Institutions Code, I put down the code, they're administered by regional center providers. They're available for those who are age 18 and older. As with every other service, if you want to take advantage of PIP, you bring it up as a topic at your IPP meeting and try to, if possible, get it included as a goal in your IPP. I just want to let you know that there actually was some additional amendments to the law as it applies to the PIP. Before, there was like a specific amount of money that the regional center would help cover. This is really to make it so it to expand the potential employers who are willing to expand the availability of employers who will provide these internships, because they will get some form of additional financial assistance through the regional center, that amount no longer applies. Instead, it's just paying the minimum wage, and with instead being working up to 1,040 hours per year of that internship. And so yeah, basically how it works is that you bring it up with your service coordinator, an IPP meeting. There's actually a service provider who, again, I'm just going by how I've typically seen it, but each regional center must have a policy on PIP. So definitely be forthcoming and requesting and demanding that information, whatever that regional center is. They have to give it to you. But they set it up where you work with a service provider to figure out, okay, what is an eligible, what kind of job do you want? What kind of skills or employment or vocation are you interested in? And who do we have who's willing to coordinate and collaborate with this regional center in giving you that internship opportunity? And then the regional center can work that out in terms of like what kind of other expenses they will cover to make it so that the employer is seriously making an effort to provide that paid opportunity to you, or if you have a family member or a child who is a client of the regional center. And the ultimate goal being that sustaining that paid internship, or that paid internship resulting in a full-time employment that pays minimum wage. So I just want to let you know that this is a resource. Regional centers do have information and are obligated to provide that information and help you figuring out how to access and take advantage of this program. But just be reminded that you should make that clear as, and you can, you don't even have to wait until the IPP meeting. You can even straight up be like, I want to have a meeting to talk about paid internships. So just want to let you know that this is definitely a helpful resource as it applies to paid employment. Whew, okay, I'm sorry I'm covering so much on the regional center aspect. I just can't help myself when there's like, I tend to really shoot off with a lot of information, but I do hope this is useful. I just want to give you a heads up that there are services that the regional center can't provide, or they can't provide it because there's like, there's a certain condition to it, but there are exceptions even to that. So are there certain transition services the regional center can't provide, can't pay for? Yes. If you are 18 to 22 years old and you get special education services and you have not received a diploma or a certificate of completion, the regional center is barred from paying for these following services. And some of them will be familiar to you because I just talked about it. One of them is day programs. Those are like, those are structured programs for adult consumer clients of the regional center during the day. Vocational education, so those are just kind of services to help teach work skills. Other work services, independent living programs. Remember I talked about ILS? Turns out this gets barred if you are between that age, 18 to 22, and you're still eligible for special education. The idea and mobility training. That's like services. That's like services to help train you how to use public transportation or how to use other ways to get from place to place. And the underlying assumption behind this is that, well, you're still eligible for special education. Go to the school district for those types of services, for services like independent living, for vocational. That's basically the understanding of why this restriction exists. So now that being said, let's say you're in a difficult situation of you're not in the school district. You're not really, you've left the school for whatever reason. You've left the school system. Keep in mind, you can ask to return to the school system for the purposes of trying to get services that you need for transition, for transition as it relates to like community education and work. But that being said, there are exceptions, and I'll go on to that. Is there an exemption to this bar against those services that I just listed in the previous slide? Yes, there is. An exemption or exception shall be granted through the IPP process. Once again, that IPP comes right back into this and shall be based on a determination that the generic service is not appropriate to meet the consumer's need. Again, going back to generic resource, if it turns out that the school district is unable to meet that need, let's say you're asking, that, for instance, you reached out to your school district about services to help you get vocational skills or about learning independent skills, and they either don't have the program or the program is just not appropriate for your needs. Well, then that means that generic resource, again, that's a generic resource, goes right back to that, is not appropriate. It's not, so you can use that to push the regional center to provide that service. Another big exception, you're in a paid internship program, right? Going back to PIP. So if you're like in a paid internship program, all those services that were blocked off of that previous slide, you've got access to it now. It's like, I'm in a paid internship, so give me that independent living service now. It's no longer barred, even though I'm between the age of 18 and 22. And once again, I'll give an example just to highlight this. I did have a client who was 18 or 19 years old. He was in special education, and he requested independent living skills from the regional center. And, the focus being like, he really wanted, services to help improve specific skills. And also he was interested in things like what job opportunities there were for someone like him, or even volunteer type opportunities, and wanted to see if ILS could help them look into that as well. Regional center said no. They were like, you're in that age range, you're still eligible for special education, go to your school district. But guess what? This was right in the middle of the pandemic. The schools were closed and or their programs were blocked off because of, safety concerns about COVID, not spreading COVID. And it's like, look, those programs for like teaching independent living skills, for teaching work skills, they're closed. They're not accessible. And I'm asking for, and so that generic resource is not available. And I actually helped this family specifically make that clear to the service coordinator, citing this exception. And guess what? They were like, oh, okay. And they did an assessment and they paid for ILS. And actually, I think right now he's actually getting both, like using ILS, but also now that schools are opening back up, taking advantage of options to the school district because the services are not quite the same. So he could still utilize both. So just giving you an example of where that came up. Also, but like I said, you don't have to rely on this kind of PowerPoint to be aware of that. Regional center should tell you about these exceptions and exemptions. So once again, they can't be like, go to generic resource, go to the school district. They should be telling you when there are opportunities where you can still access the services if you meet an exemption or an exception. Okay, I'm done.
Whoa, that was a lot of information. Thank you. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to go ahead and stop the recording to see if there are any questions for Emily. So now we're going to talk about the Department of Rehabilitation's role, and we're going to talk in particular about pre-employment transition services through the Department of Rehabilitation. So next slide. Okay, so what are pre-employment transition services? It's a set of services to help students with disabilities under the age of 22 prepare for their careers. And it's DOR's responsibility to make sure that services are available to students with disabilities. There's no need to apply for let's call it pre-ETS. If the student has an employment goal, invite the Department of Rehabilitation to the transition planning meeting. And we're going to see what these pre-ETS ETS services are, so that you can start thinking about maybe utilizing some of them. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, one pre-employment transition service is job exploration. What will it do? It'll talk to so it's an opportunity for the student to learn what different options are, career options. Maybe hear speakers who talk about different career options, learn about the labor market, career assessments and mentors. So that's one of the pre-employment transition services available. The next one, work-based learning experience. It could include job shadowing, volunteering, paid internships, summer jobs. Next one. Counseling on post-secondary education opportunities. When we talk about post-secondary, we're talking about going to college. So the student could get information about schools. Perhaps it's going to be a university, maybe it's a trade school, taking college level classes, summer programs, visiting campuses, all part of the counseling on post-secondary education opportunities. Another pre-employment transition service is work readiness training. So they can teach you how social skills, how to better understand instructions, understand punctuality and planning, getting ready for work, transportation training, how are you going to get to work, writing resumes, preparing for interviews. It's all part of the work readiness training. Another service is instruction on self-advocacy, building up your confidence, helping you make choices, know your rights, giving you community resources, and helping you to understand how to challenge a decision that you may get, denying something. So you're not a department, when you're receiving, as a student, when you're receiving pre-ETS, you're not a client of the Department of Rehabilitation. That happens afterwards. And I know, Mary, you know more about the application process, but I'm gonna talk about this briefly, and if you wanted to add anything, that would be great. So you can apply online, you can go or call the local office. They also have orientations. Excuse me, once you apply, the Department of Rehabilitation has 60 days to decide whether you will be eligible for Department of Rehab services. And if so, they have 90 days to develop an individualized plan for employment, an IPE. So in schools, we have IEPs. At regional centers, we have IPPs. And when you're a Department of Rehab client, you have IPEs. And that's the contract between you and the Department of Rehab. Mary, I'm going to let you add anything else.
Sure, Maria, like you mentioned before, the pre-employment, pre-ETS, you can actually contact the Department of Rehab and let them know that you're interested as a student. To apply for the Department of Rehabilitation Services, you do have to be 18 years old. So I would, recommend that you apply for it either, maybe a month before, but you do have to be 18 years old, because it does take a process. It's, everything is a process. So you have to go to orientation, and then you meet with a counselor, and then they develop the IPE. And again, keep in mind that you must have a vocational goal in order to be eligible for the Department of Rehabilitation. So yeah, thanks, Maria.
Thank you, Mary. We do have on our website publications about the Department of Rehabilitation. In fact, we have the contract to advocate for people who are Department of Rehab clients or want to become Department of Rehab clients. It's called the Clients Assistance Program, or CAP. So if you're having trouble becoming eligible, or if you are a DOR client and you're having trouble getting services, supports, you can always call us. And Lonnie put information in chat on our CAP program and Department of Rehab. We have a lot of resources in our pub section of our website. Next slide. IPE, just like the other contracts between you and the public agency, you're going to have an employment goal. You have to have an employment goal to be a part of the Department of, a client of the Department of Rehab timelines, right? You have to have goals and when you're going to achieve those goals, steps to reach those goals, services that you need to reach those goals. Who's going to provide those services? When will they start? And remember, just like everything else, it's all based on your choices, individualized. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about disagreements and hurdles, right? Because that happens. So let's, and here I invite Emily and Mary to join in, and, you know, because for each system, there's always disagreement and hurdles. And just so that you know, on our website, we also have what is called the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual. And there's a whole chapter on when you disagree with the district that you should look at. I think that's chapter 6 of that manual. We also have a manual for clients of the regional center. It's called the Rights Under the Lanterman Act. And I forget what chapter talks about when you have disagreements, but there is a chapter about that. So let's go on to the next slide. So yeah, the problem, and I'm sure you've faced this from time to time, is when you're working with multiple agencies, you're getting bounced back and forth. Here are some tips. Figure out the services that you need. And one thing we always say is sometimes you may not know the name of the service, but describe what your need is. And I'm sure a name of a service will come up. And then decide who's going to pay for it, right? Ask everyone, all of the members of the transition team, to talk to one another, invite them all there. Of course, you're going to schedule a meeting to have them all there. And if they're going to deny a service, obviously they should provide that denial in writing so that you know why they did it, the law that they're citing, and your appeal rights. And you can always contact us should you have problems, you know, during your transition planning, so that maybe we can, at the very least, give you some counsel and advice. Next slide. So how can you solve the problem? Of course, I always say start with if you're talking about the regional center, start with your service coordinator. And if that doesn't work, then talk to the supervisor. And if that doesn't work, the program manager, I think that's what they're called, who are over the supervisors. Try to resolve the matter that way. And then if necessary, follow whatever you need to do. If you're in special ed, you might need to do a compliance complaint, or you might need to do a due process, who knows? Bring a family or friend to a meeting. That could be helpful, if only for the purpose of making you less nervous, right? Because you've got someone there to support you. Always ask for an explanation of things in writing. Ask, and Emily mentioned it during her presentation, if they cite something to you and say, well, our policy is this, or we can't do that, ask for the policy, ask for the law that says they can't do that, ask for the regulations that say, you know, ask for there's got to be something in writing that says this, right? And what is it? When you're in meetings, it's always good to have a note taker. Sometimes you're busy, you know, listening to what the other side is doing, and you're formulating your own responses to that. And it's really hard to take notes when there's a lot going on, and it could be quick, right? Quickly, things are moving fast. Next slide. More formal, of course, you can always reach out to us. We have our sister organization is called the Office of Client Rights Advocates. For every regional center, there's an attorney, client's rights advocate, and an assistant client's rights advocate. You could reach out to them. They're there to advocate for regional center clients or people who want to become regional center clients. And they could give you information, at the very least, give you information. Know what your appeal rights are, appeal by the deadline. I always say, if you're not quite sure whether you want to appeal or not, appeal by the deadline. You can always withdraw an appeal at any time. It'll be much more difficult to appeal late. Sometimes different programs will allow you to appeal late, but you have to show a really good reason for having appealed late, for having missed the deadline. So appeal, you can always, retract your appeal. Make complaints, learn the complaint process for the agency you're involved with. A way to change things is to attend public meetings and voice your concerns, contact your representatives. It's all good information. You know what? Our legislatures make the law. So the Lanterman Act, for example, is state law. If you want the Lanterman Act to change, you contact your state representatives. Next slide. We've got information here on how to contact us, our intake line. We've got our link to our website and the Office of Client Rights Advocates, Northern California and Southern California.
Maria, if I may, I wanted to share our website, and I also wanted to share. There's a website, and I think it's really helpful. When I was a CAP advocate, we would basically refer some of the consumers to the California Career Zone. So Brayman, if you don't mind, if I can share this California Career Zone just to show it to the participants. I think it's a really good website. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Okay, so I haven't been on this website for a long time, but it's basically it's put on by the California Career Resource Network, which is the California Department of Ed. But here they have I Want To, and they have a list of different areas, additional resources. They have, for example, choosing an industry, choosing a field of study, financial aid, the cost of college. They also have, for example, if you want, let's see here, there was a quick assessment to determine, to try to identify what your vocational goal is. And it identifies the type of, for example, realistic. It'll say realistic occupations frequently involve work activities that include practical hands-on. If you go to investigative, it also identifies that. Conventional. So I think this is a really good resource. And it identifies, like, for example, the different schools, what you need to reach that goal. My classes, my goals. So I just wanted to share this website as well. So, and we can send the link when the information is sent, but we also have our website. This is our website. We have, if you click on resources, you can also select the language here, but we have them by topic. We have information on California Children's Services, conservatorship, Department of Rehabilitation. You go down, Medi-Cal Regional Center, special education. There's a lot of information, and Maria was referring to our Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual. This has 16 chapters, and all our publications come in a question and answer format. There's a chapter on transition services, including vocational education. This is really good information for that can assist in developing the transition plan. So, and then here is the information on due process and compliance procedures. So I'll click on one just so you can see how it comes in a question and answer format. How can I get the school district to evaluate or assess my child? It gives you the response, and it cites the California Department of Ed Code or CFRs. So here's the information. So we wanted to share this information with you also.
Yeah, thank you. And we have a similar manual for the rights under the Lanterman Act. So if we go back, and the RULA, that's our acronym for the rights under the Lanterman Act manual. It's the same format, question answer, eligibility for regional center services. Chapter 10 is appeals and complaints when you disagree. So really important. If you ever have questions about regional centers or special ed, go to our manual first, because you might find the answer. Not only the answer, but the law, the code, the regulation, case law that supports what the answer is, right? So really important. We also have, Mary, the transition planning, the transition publication. So
Yes.
aside from transition information being in our SIR manual, we also have a specific publication on transition services for students, and we have it in different languages, so you can choose your language up there. So I know it's a lot of information that we've given you, but you know, you're going to get all the material and you can take the time to read things through. And if you have any questions, you can always call us. You can call the Office of Client Rights Advocacy office for further help. So we're going to go ahead and stop the recording to see if there are any further questions or comments. Okay, so we've come to the end of the presentation. Thank you, Emily and Mary and Lonnie and Raymond and interpreters and Patricia for inviting us. Thank you everyone for attending until 8 o'clock. I know it was a long training and lots of information. Patricia, I don't know if you want to say anything.
We have on my team, you know, we are definitely super glad, and I'm very thankful that you are here with us tonight. I know it's a weeknight, and also, you know, it comes to the expense of maybe, you know, leaving something unattended at your home. So it's definitely greatly appreciated. But this was definitely a worth amazing training that I'm gonna also process on my own. I might have some questions for you all, and I appreciate your collaboration. And then I'm looking forward to get the materials and distribute it tomorrow to the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to the
Have a good night,
interpreters too.
everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Have a nice evening.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.